My name is Maren Whitfield. I'm 32. 4 months ago, I drove 6 hours to my sister's wedding with a dress on a hanger in the back seat and a card in my purse I'd spent 3 weeks choosing the words for. When I pulled into the venue, my father was standing at the entrance like he'd been posted there. He told me to turn around. My mother appeared a second later and said, "This isn't the day for this, Maren." I asked her what she meant. She said, "You know what you did." I didn't know what I did. I still don't, not really. I stood in the parking lot of a vineyard in my best dress, holding a card I'd never get to give my sister, and watched my own parents close a door on me at a wedding I had paid for. Every vendor. Every deposit. My name on every contract. 3 days later, my mother called. Not to apologize. She called about a bill. $38,000. And what I told her on that call is the reason I'm telling you this story today. Before I get into it, if you're the type who likes a good comment section, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. And if stories like this are your thing, you know what to do. Now let's go back to the beginning, to a Sunday afternoon 9 months ago, when my sister called me with news that should have made me happy, and for about an hour, it did. It was late February, the kind of gray Vermont afternoon where the sky and the snow are almost the same color. I was at my kitchen table doing something unremarkable, probably paying bills, when my phone lit up with a video call from my younger sister, Paige. She's 27. Still living in Millbrook, 15 minutes from our parents, working at the same dental office she'd worked at since she was 22. I picked up and her face filled the screen, flushed and grinning. Behind her I could see our mother, Linda, in the kitchen, already on the phone with someone else, gesturing with her free hand like she was conducting an orchestra. "I'm engaged," Paige said, holding her hand up to the camera before I'd even said hello. "Connor asked me last night. At the lake house. It was perfect." I felt something warm and real move through my chest. Whatever came later, that feeling was genuine. "Paige, that's incredible. Congratulations. Connor's parents are already talking venues," she said. "You know the Ashfords. They own half the orchards on the east side of town. His mom said we could use the old barn property, the one with the pond." I knew the Ashfords the way everyone in a small town knows the family with money. Connor was the middle son, soft-spoken, the kind of guy who held doors and remembered birthdays. I was glad for her. "When's the date?" I asked. "I'll start looking at flights, well, drives, I guess, since I'm only 6 hours away now." There was a pause. My mother's voice drifted in from somewhere off-screen, not quite to me, more like she was thinking out loud. "We haven't even started planning, don't get ahead of things." "I just meant I want to be there," I said. "Obviously I'm coming." "We'll figure out logistics," Linda said, finally turning toward the phone. "Hi, honey. Exciting, right?" Her smile didn't sit quite right on her face, the way a picture frame hangs slightly crooked no matter how many times you straighten it. "It really is," I said. Paige talked for another 15 minutes about color palettes and whether September or October would be better for the leaves. I listened, I smiled, I took notes on my phone about what kind of gift she might like. But underneath it, something in me had gone quiet and watchful, the way you get quiet around a dog that hasn't bitten you yet but you've heard stories. That call was the first real reason I'd had in over a year to spend real time with my family. I should have paid closer attention to how careful my mother was being with her words. 2 weeks later, my mother called again. Not Paige. Linda, on a Tuesday evening, which meant she'd had all day to think about how she wanted to open the conversation. "I need to run something by you," she said. "Practical stuff." "Okay." "The barn venue needs a card on file for the deposit and the final balance. Your father's credit took a hit after the truck loan, and Paige doesn't really have a credit history yet. We were hoping you could put your name on a few of the contracts. Just to hold everything. We'll handle the actual payments." I'd heard a version of this sentence before. When I was 24, I co-signed a personal loan for my father that took me 2 years and a credit counselor to untangle. When I was 28, I sent Linda $2,200 for what she called the roof, which turned out, months later, to be Paige's car repair. I knew exactly what kind of sentence this was. I said yes anyway, because she was my sister, and because some part of me still believed that showing up for people was the same thing as being loved by them. How much are we talking? I asked. Altogether, around $36,000. But your actual deposit is only about $4,000. The rest gets billed after the wedding, once everyone's settled up. $36,000, under my name, for an event I hadn't been asked a single question about yet. That's a lot to put on one card, I said. It's not really your money, Maren, it's just your name holding the spot. We'll pay it off as it comes due. I promise. I told myself this was what a good sister did. I told myself the promise would hold this time. I signed every contract that came through my email that week without reading past the bolded totals twice. I want to be honest with you about that, because it matters later. I knew, somewhere in me, exactly what I was agreeing to. I just didn't want to know it yet. Being written out. Over the following months, the wedding took shape around me, but never with me. Paige created a group chat for the bridal party called Ashford Crew. I found out about it by accident, when she forwarded me a photo meant for that thread, a row of bridesmaid dresses with the caption "Thoughts?" I texted back asking which one she liked best, and she didn't answer for 2 days. I called to ask about the rehearsal schedule. She said she'd check and get back to me. She never did. I called again a few weeks later to ask if she wanted me to say anything during the toasts. That one went to voicemail, and the callback, when it came hours later, was a text, "So busy RN, talk soon." I called my mother to ask if there was anything I could help coordinate, beyond the contracts. "It's all handled, sweetie," she said. "Don't worry about a thing." I never got an invitation. Not a paper one, not a digital one, nothing with my name and an RSVP card. I told myself this was normal, that sisters don't formally invite sisters, that I was already assumed to be there. I want you to notice, the way I eventually had to notice, how many times I explained away a silence instead of asking about it directly. 3 weeks before the wedding, Paige posted a photo from a bridal shower. A backyard, string lights, a dozen women I half recognized from high school, my mother front and center holding a mimosa. The caption read, "The only people who matter, love you all so much." I counted the faces. Mine wasn't one of them, and I hadn't been invited to that either. I stared at that photo for a long time, then closed the app and told myself maybe it was just a smaller, closer circle. Maybe I was reading into things. I had a long drive ahead of me, and I didn't want to start it angry. The flight home. I requested the days off work 2 months in advance. I work as a project manager for a regional engineering firm, the kind of job where my calendar gets fought over months ahead, so this wasn't a small ask. I packed my dress, the one I'd had altered specifically for this, navy with a slight flare at the hem. I packed the gift, a set of hand-thrown pottery from a studio Paige had once mentioned online, the kind of thing you buy because you remember a small detail someone dropped 6 months ago and you wanted them to feel remembered. $310, wrapped carefully in brown paper. I texted my mother when I left my apartment. "On the road, see you all tomorrow." No response for almost 4 hours. Then, just as I was checking into my hotel, "Okay, drive safe." 3 words. No question about how the drive was. No mention of seeing me. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed that night and looked at that text for longer than I'd like to admit. I thought about texting my friend Dana back home with a screenshot and the caption, "Is this weird or am I being sensitive?" But I didn't. I put the phone face down on the nightstand, hung up my dress, and told myself that tomorrow, in person, things would feel different. They always had a way of seeming colder over text and warmer in a room. I believed that, or I wanted to. I texted Paige the next morning asking what time to arrive. An hour later, ceremonies at 2, come whenever. No mention of breakfast together, no mention of getting ready with the rest of them, nothing that made me feel like a sister instead of a guest checking a schedule. I ironed my dress anyway, carefully, the way you'd press a shirt for a job interview, because in some way, that's exactly what this felt like. I was auditioning for a place in my own family that I thought I already had. The door. The venue, Cobble Hill Orchard, sat on a slope of land just outside town, the kind of place with a restored barn, string lights threaded through apple trees, and a gravel drive that crunched under your shoes. I parked at the far end of a lot already half full of cars, smoothed my dress, picked up the gift, and walked toward the entrance with my heart doing something strange and fast in my chest. I saw my father first, standing near the barn doors in a suit that fit him better than I expected. He was shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, probably an Ashford relative. When he looked up and saw me, his face did something I'll never forget. It went from polite to alarmed to blank in about 2 seconds, and then he turned and walked inside without a word. I kept walking. 15 yards. 10. 5. My mother stepped out of the barn doors before I reached them, in a dusty rose dress, hair done, makeup flawless, standing in the exact center of the path like she'd been placed there. "Maren," she said, low and even. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for Paige's wedding, Mom." "You need to leave." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "I drove 6 hours." "Lower your voice. People are watching. I'm your daughter." She stepped closer, close enough that I caught her perfume, the same one she'd worn my whole life, and her voice dropped to something quiet and surgical. "This isn't the day for this. You know what you did." "I genuinely don't know what you think I did." She didn't answer that. A couple walked past us toward the barn, glancing over, and my mother's face rearranged itself into a smile for them before resetting to stone the second they passed. My father stood just inside the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground, saying absolutely nothing. From inside, a warm, confident voice called out. "Linda? Everything okay out here?" My mother's spine went rigid. The voice belonged to Eleanor Ashford, Connor's mother, a tall woman in pearls who I'd later learn had been told, repeatedly, that the Whitfields had exactly one daughter. Eleanor stepped out, smiling, until her eyes landed on me and the smile turned curious. "Linda, I didn't realize Paige had a sister." The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt much longer. "She doesn't," my mother said. She's a family friend," a little confused about the venue. Eleanor looked at me, then back at my mother, something shifting behind her eyes. "I see," she said slowly. "Well, we start in 10 minutes. She went back inside. I looked at my mother. There was no apology in her face, no flicker of guilt. Just fear, the cornered kind. "A family friend," I repeated. "Maren, please, you wouldn't understand. How long have you been telling people I don't exist?" She didn't answer. That was when it landed, fully, the way truth does when it's been circling you for years before it finally sits down. She hadn't forgotten to invite me. She had erased me, on purpose, for who knows how long, and I had spent that whole drive convincing myself it was a misunderstanding. I set the gift down gently on the stone step. "Keep this. It's for Paige." Her shoulders dropped half an inch, relief flooding her face. "Thank you, Maren, this is really—" "Don't," I said. "Don't explain." "I heard you." I turned and walked back down the gravel drive, past the guests still arriving, past my car, and got in. I sat there for a long moment before I let myself cry, the quiet kind, where your shoulders shake but you don't make a sound, because some habits you carry even when no one's watching. Through the open window I could hear a string quartet starting somewhere behind the barn. I started the engine and drove away before the ceremony I'd paid for had even officially begun. The invoices. I checked back into my hotel room still in my dress, mascara smudged, hands not quite steady. I sat on the bed for a while doing nothing at all. Then I opened my laptop, because some part of me already knew what I was going to find, and I needed to see it in writing. For vendor confirmation emails sat in my inbox, all sent over the past several weeks, all of which I'd skimmed and filed away without really absorbing. Now I read every line. Cobble Hill Orchard. Contract holder, Maren Whitfield. Deposit paid, $4,000. Remaining balance, $18,200, due within 5 business days of the event. Harvest Table Catering. Contract holder, Maren Whitfield. Deposit paid, $1,100. Remaining balance, $9,400. Wildroot Floral. Contract holder, Maren Whitfield. Deposit paid, $600. Remaining balance, $4,100. A photographer, a string quartet, a rental company for chairs and linens, each one carrying my name, my signature, my card. I added it up twice to be sure. Total deposits already paid and gone, roughly $6,000. Total outstanding balance, due within days, $38,000. I sat with my laptop closed on my knees and thought about what was happening a few miles away at that exact moment. Toasts being raised. My mother hugging my sister. A reception under string lights paid for, in full, by a daughter they'd just called a family friend. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't fire off an angry email. I just sat there and let the number repeat in my head until it stopped sounding like a number and started sounding like a sentence about my entire family. Aunt Carol. My phone rang at 9:45. My mother's older sister, Carol, 64, a retired nurse who has never once in my life softened the truth to make someone more comfortable. Maren, where were you? I didn't see you at the ceremony. I told her everything. The blocked entrance, the whispered order to leave, the words family friend, Eleanor's question, my mother's answer. There was a long silence on the line, the kind where you can hear someone deciding exactly how angry to let themselves be. She told them you don't exist, Carol said finally, flat and slow. Lord. At the reception, she stood up during the toast and said our family, Robert, myself, and our page. I sat there thinking that was an odd way to say it. I wish I'd said something. It's not your fault, Aunt Carol. No, it isn't. It's hers. A pause, sharper now. Maren. Those vendor contracts. Whose name is on them? Mine. All of them. The silence that followed had a different texture to it, less shock, more calculation. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened into something I'd later recognize as strategy. Then listen to me, honey. Your mother stood in a room full of people and said you don't exist. You don't owe that room 1 single cent. The morning after. I woke up the next morning to a notification from Paige's Instagram. A carousel of wedding photos, the barn glowing gold in the background, my sister in lace, Connor in a charcoal suit. A family portrait further down the feed, 6 people, 2 families joined, 1 daughter missing. The caption read, surrounded by everyone who matters. I read it 3 times. Then I checked my email. The venue's invoice had landed overnight, automated and cheerful, with a little orchard logo at the top. Thank you for choosing Cobble Hill. Your remaining balance of $18,200 is due by Thursday. Below it, 3 more invoices, all timestamped the night before, all addressed to me, all with the same 5-day deadline. $38,000, due in 4 days. I looked at the Instagram post again. Everyone who matters. Then back at the invoices with my name on every line. Something in me settled, not into anger yet, that would come later, in the shower, in the middle of meetings, at 2 in the morning for weeks. What I felt that morning was simpler than anger. It was clarity. I was the only person who paid for that wedding, the only person not in those photographs, and the only person currently receiving bills for a party I'd been physically removed from. Something had to change, and for the first time in my life, I decided it wasn't going to be me bending to make it work. A voicemail came in from Paige that afternoon. I almost didn't listen to it. When I did, it went like this: hey, so the wedding was honestly perfect, the barn looked incredible. Sorry things got weird with Mom, she said it'd be easier this way with the Ashfords, you know how they are about that stuff. Anyway, thank you so much for helping with the vendor stuff, you're seriously the best. Love you, talk soon. Not a single word about the door. Not one acknowledgement that she'd known, ahead of time, what was going to happen to me. Just gratitude for the money, wrapped in the kind of warmth she only ever offered when she needed something. I didn't call her back. Cutting the cord. That night, in my hotel room, I researched exactly what my legal standing was. The answer, in plain terms, was this: the name on the contract carries the obligation, but it also carries the authority. I could authorize the final payments. I could also refuse them and redirect the bills to the people who'd actually hosted the event. I called the venue first. A woman named Sandra picked up, all warmth and small talk about how lovely the wedding had been, until I told her I was the contract holder and I would not be authorizing the remaining balance. I asked that the invoice be redirected to the Whitfield family directly. She paused, asked if there was a dispute. I told her there wasn't. I simply wasn't paying. I made the same call to the caterer, the florist, the photography studio, and the rental company. 5 calls, under 20 minutes total. I didn't raise my voice once. I said one thing, over and over, calmly: no. The next morning I called my bank, cancelled the card linked to every one of those contracts, and requested a replacement number. $38,000 in pending charges would now have nowhere to land except squarely back on the people who'd actually thrown the party. I checked out of my hotel before sunrise and drove the 6 hours home in near silence, passing the turnoff toward my parents' street without slowing down. The family strikes back. By Tuesday, the calls started. My mother first, sugar-voiced, asking how I was settling back in before pivoting, almost too smoothly, to the strangest call from the venue. I told her exactly why I'd pulled my authorization. She called it dramatic. I called it accurate. After everything I've done for you, she said, this is how you repay me? You told a room full of people I don't exist, I said. Those two things can both be true, Mom. You raised me, and you also erased me. I'm not confused about which one hurt more. She brought up my father's blood pressure next, the way she always does when logic runs out. I told her his health was between him and his doctor, not me and my credit card. She hung up on me. She called back 40 minutes later, sharper, threatening to tell the whole town what kind of daughter abandons her family over money. I told her to go ahead, that I'd rather be the daughter she badmouthed than the daughter she pretended didn't exist. That one landed. I heard her breath catch before she hung up again. Paige called next, crying in the theatrical way she's perfected since we were kids. She and Connor didn't have $38,000 sitting around, she said, they were starting their lives together, I was ruining it. I asked her if she'd known, before the wedding, that our mother was going to turn me away. There was a long pause before she admitted, quietly, that she'd known it might happen, that Mom said it would be easier with the Ashfords. She'd known, and she'd let it happen anyway, and then asked me to pay for it. My father called that evening, which on its own told me how serious this had gotten, since my father communicates almost exclusively through one-line emails about the weather. He asked if I could be flexible, for the family's sake. I asked if he remembered standing in that doorway and saying nothing while I was turned away. The line went quiet, and then it went dead. Every single one of them hung up the moment the conversation required something honest from them instead of something from my bank account. The town talks. My Aunt Carol, never one to wait for permission, called Eleanor Ashford directly using the number off the wedding program she'd kept in her purse. She told her, plainly, that the Whitfields had 2 daughters, not one, and that the older one had paid for every part of that wedding and been turned away at the door for the trouble. Eleanor went quiet for a long stretch, then asked why on earth my mother would do something like that. Carol told her she'd have to ask Linda herself, but that whatever the reason, it didn't change what had happened to me. Eleanor called my mother that same afternoon, and from what I heard secondhand, it was short and ice-cold. The Ashfords would not be covering the remaining balance. That was a Whitfield problem, born from a Whitfield lie. Connor, for his part, confronted Paige that night, furious that he'd married into a story he hadn't been told. Paige and Connor ended up taking out a loan to cover the balance, with his parents reluctantly co-signing, not out of warmth but because their name was attached to the event and they didn't want vendors chasing them down. 4 days into their marriage, they had their first real fight, over a sister-in-law Connor hadn't known existed and a bill nobody could comfortably afford. Millbrook is a small town, and small towns talk. Within 2 weeks, the story had made its way through the church, the diner, the school pickup line. Versions shifted slightly with each retelling, but the bones stayed the same. Linda Whitfield hid her older daughter, turned her away from the wedding she paid for, then tried to bill her for it. My mother stopped attending her usual church. My father stopped sitting on the porch in the evenings, the way he used to every night of my childhood. When my mother called Carol to accuse her of destroying the family, Carol's answer was simple: I didn't expose you. I just stopped covering for you. 6 months later. It's been a little over 6 months since that morning in the parking lot at Cobble Hill. I got a promotion at work not long after, lead project manager, the kind of role I'd been quietly working toward for years without anyone at home ever asking how it was going. I started therapy, not specifically about the wedding, but about the 32 years before it, about what my therapist calls a lifelong habit of paying for love I should have been given for free. I talk to Aunt Carol every other Sunday now. She keeps me gently updated on Millbrook, not for gossip, but so I'm never caught off guard. My parents have paid off roughly $14,000 of the 38, mostly from dipping into savings they'd meant to leave alone. The rest sits on Paige and Connor's loan, a quiet, ongoing strain in a marriage that started with a lie standing at its center. Eleanor still hasn't fully warmed back up to my mother. I'm told the holidays this year were tense in a way nobody bothered to hide. My mother hasn't called, written, or texted since that last conversation. Carol tells me she refers to the whole thing as Maren's outburst, which I suppose is easier to live with than calling it what it actually was. I don't hate her. I've spent real money and real hours in therapy making sure of that. But I've stopped pretending her version of love didn't cost me something every single time I accepted it. My father did email me, about a month after, the longest message he's ever sent me in my life. He admitted he stood there like a post and said nothing, that he didn't have a good excuse, that he was, in his own words, a coward that day. He didn't fix anything with that email. He didn't confront my mother or demand an apology on my behalf. But it was honest, and it was the first honest thing anyone in my family had offered me since this started. I wrote back, short and careful, telling him it meant more than he probably realized, and that I wasn't ready to come home, but I'd keep his words. He hasn't written since, and I don't need him to. He said the thing. I heard it. I'm not telling you this story so you'll hate my mother, or my sister, or even my father for his silence. They're flawed people who built an image they thought they needed, and somewhere along the way, I became the part of the picture that didn't fit. That's not an excuse for what happened. It's just what happened. I'm telling you this because maybe you recognize some version of it. Maybe you're the one who shows up, who pays, who absorbs the silence and calls it love because nobody ever taught you another word for it. I did that for a long time. I called it being the bigger person. Every time I wrote a check or swallowed an insult or pretended an empty chair didn't bother me, I lost a small piece of myself I'm still finding my way back to. A boundary isn't punishment, and it isn't revenge. It's the moment you finally decide you're worth more than what you've been settling for, and then you act like you mean it. $38,000 is what my piece cost. I don't regret a single dollar of it I didn't pay. If you've ever been the one footing the bill, literally or otherwise, for a seat at a table that was never actually built for you, maybe it's time you built your own table instead, and sat at the head of it. I'd genuinely love to know what you'd have done. Would you have paid the $38,000, or would you have drawn the line like I did? Type pay or boundary down in the comments, I'll be reading through all of them. And if this one hit close to home, you know what to do before you go. I've got more stories like this coming, so I'll see you in the next one.